All right, guys. So today we will be talking about the Constitutional Convention of 1787. So last week we talked about the Articles of Confederation and how weak it was, and they had to change it. So this is where there will be changing from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution. So as we discussed, there's a lot of weaknesses. So the Articles of Confederation was America's first try at the new government after the Revolutionary War. And we talked about there's so many weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, due to reasons for fighting for the independence from Britain. They don't want to fall back into the same condition they were with them with such a strong central government. So each state has one vote in Congress, regardless of their size. One of the weaknesses, Congress really has no power to tax, so there's no way for them to earn funds. No way for them to raise money, no executive branch, and as part of executive branch is the president, and they're scared of kingship at the time, so of course they did not want that. So it's going to be a weakness of their Articles of Confederation. There's no national court system, so no national or Supreme Court to settle disputes between states. Amendments required a unanimous vote. So remember, we talked about how all 13 of the representatives had to agree to amend the Articles of Confederation, and we talked about how that's really almost impossible for all 13 people to agree about one thing. And states printed their own money and their own currency, so it made it really hard for people to travel between states because there'd have to be an exchange rate for each state. Since each currency had a different value. And at any time, you can pause the video to take the notes. All right, so the problems are going to really come to a head with something known as Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts. So most of the men that fought the Revolutionary War, the soldiers, they came home from the war and they took out loans to start farming. And now a lot of them are in debt. So now they're trying to make a living after the war, and they're in debt. So Daniel Shay, he leads a group to rebel over back owed pay in Massachusetts. So most of the states would pay them for fighting the Revolutionary War, or they would excuse some of their debts. But Massachusetts, on the other hand, did not do that. So they did not ever pay their soldiers, and that's going to infuriate them. It's also going to infuriate them when Massachusetts starts throwing these soldiers in jail and debtors' prison for not paying their debts. So Daniel Shay will be the one that's leading this uprising. So there is not a federal government at the time. That's one of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. So whenever this rebellion happens, there's no one to shut it down. So they rebel. Daniel leads the attacks on the courthouses. He goes to jails and breaks men out that were thrown in there for not paying their debts. And like we said, the federal government could not do anything because there was no federal army to shut it down. Eventually, there was a local militia that was raised to put down the rebellion, but there have been many casualties. And this just goes to show how weak the Articles of Confederation really are, and that there's a great need for a new government. So this is what's going to pretty much lead us into the Philadelphia Convention, when they're also going to start discussing, Shays' Rebellion and how there needs to be a change and other items and weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. So the Philadelphia Convention, they meet in 1787. So state representatives decide to create a new government rather than fix the articles. So instead of trying to just try to do some amendments to the Articles of Confederation, they're saying, this document is so weak, it's so poorly written, we just need to scrap it and start over. And that's what they're really going to do. They're going to start over and just create a new document, which we call the Constitution. So some of the key figures that are going to be in this meeting, we'll start off with George Washington. He's very respected since he led the U.S. forces during the Revolution. During the convention, he doesn't really talk very much, but he will settle arguments really quickly whenever People are arguing about different things. So before they get out of hand, Washington will step up and make sure he shuts that down and everything is kept respectful during this convention. Also, James Madison, he's probably the most important. He's known as the father of the Constitution since he writes majority of it. Alexander Hamilton, he fights for a strong national government and feels that the strong federal government can bring everyone together and make America strong. But opposing him would be Benjamin Franklin, and he has a different view than Hamilton, and he would like the states to hold more power, almost as they do with the Articles of Confederation. They have so much state power, so he wants them to hold a lot of state power. Maybe not as much as they do hold in the Articles of Confederation, but he wants states to have a lot of power. George Mason, he wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights. He makes sure that they come away with some type of Bill of Rights, so that he makes sure there's a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. And we have Roger Sherman. He is he's from Connecticut. He argues not to overlook the small states. So he thinks the small states should just have the same amount of power as the large states do. So this is where one of the controversies will arise. So there's two different major plans for the Constitution. So Alexander Hamilton, he writes the Virginia plan. So it's going to be the first plan of the Constitution. There will be a Congress that will represent everyone, and elections for the Congress will take place. So you'll elect a representative for Congress. The bigger the state is, the population-wise, the more people it has in Congress. Due to Virginia being a large state, that would really be good for them, and they'd hold a lot of power in the government. The small states would not like this plan because, of course, they're not going to have as much power in the government, and there are going to be arguments and a compromise will be needed to create a new government. So the small states do not like the Virginia plan. Large states do like it. And on the opposite side, you have the New Jersey plan, and representation in Congress should be equal for all states and states, favored by small states because it gave more power to the small states. So the Jersey plan just pretty much says, doesn't matter how big the population is, how big the state is, all states hold the same and equal power. So here are the two different plans I'll be discussing for the Constitution. So let's look at some of the compromises that will have to be made. So to settle the dispute between the small and the large states, it's going to be the Great Compromise. So it solves the debate between large and small. So to do this, they are going to break up Congress into two parts. So there's going to be a Senate and also a House of Representatives. So Senate, you'll have two representatives regardless of the state size. So New Jersey will have two, Virginia will have two, everyone will have two senates or senators per state. So if you think about it, that would make the small states happy. So to keep the large states happy, we're also going to have another part of Congress, and that's going to be the House of Representatives. And this will be based on population size. So the bigger the population, the more representatives you'll have in Congress. So this way you could kind of keep both the small and the large states happy because both get somewhat what they want. But then there'll be a discussion of the larger states in the South. They're talking about, hey, well, we want to count our slaves as our part of a population as well. That won't go over well with the northern states because slavery is outlawed. In the North, they don't use slaves. They're saying, you should not be able to count slaves because you don't treat them like people. If you want to free them, sure, go ahead and count them as part of your population. But if they're not freed and they're under your possession, they should not be counted. Here will be the second compromise. It's going to be called a 3/5 compromise. And what the 3/5 compromise really does, it counts enslaved men and women as 3/5 of a person for state population counts. So as bad as that and wrong as that is, it counts each enslaved man and woman as 3/5 of a person, and that will go towards the state population. So that'll kind of, you're not really counting the slave as a full person, yet you're still counting somewhat of them. So it keeps both the South and the North happy. And whenever they come up with the counts, they use a census. We still use one today. This was actually a census year, 2020. So as you can see, the biggest will be California with 53 representatives in the House, and this can go up and down. So after 10 years, they do another census. Maybe a big factory came to North Carolina and tons of people flooded in. And then maybe we'll, instead of having 13 representatives, maybe we'll have 15. So this constantly changes of how many House seats you have in Congress. Okay, now we have a federal law under the Constitution, and a federal law is just a law of the land. So it's a supreme law of the land, is it national or the federal law? So states do have the power to make laws, but they cannot contradict the federal law. So for example, a driver's license is a state law. So in North Carolina, you have to be 16 before you can obtain a driver's license. But in a different state, you might just have to be 15 to have your driver's license, or you might have to be 18 before you can have your driver's license. So that is a state law. A federal law is you have to be 18 years old to vote. So it does not matter if a state put forward that you could be 16 and vote. They could not do that because that would go against the supreme law of the land or the federal law. So states can create their own laws, they just cannot go against the federal law. So it limits the power of the government to those in the Constitution. So it limits the state power somewhat because they can have their own law, but they can't go against any of the constitutional laws, the federal laws. And then we have checks and balances. So it avoids a powerful central government. So it avoids maybe like a king coming in and taking over. So they did this because they were still scared of the kingship. So checks and balances. So we're going to have 3 equal branches. So first will be legislative. They are the ones that make the laws. So if you remember, under the Articles of Confederation, this is the only branch they had. So they only had the power to make laws. They did not have any of the other powers that I'm going to show you in a second. So they only have legislative powers, or the legislative branch, under the Articles of Confederation. But now we have the legislative, we have the executive, which is the president is part of, and they are going to enforce the laws that are made by the legislative branch. And we have the judicial branch, which interprets the law. So you have legislative that makes it, executive that enforces the law, and then in the judicial system, they interpret the law. So then, towards the end, here are some of the problems that we have talked about under the Articles of Confederation, and then we're going to talk about some of the solutions. So first one being each state has 1 vote in Congress regardless of its size. And now we talked about the Great Compromise, how the Congress will be broken up into 2 parts, the Senate, where each state has 2 representatives, and then the House of Representatives, where it's going to be dictated by the population size of each state. Congress has no power to tax, of course, in the Declaration of the Constitution. Congress now has the power to tax. No executive branch was a weakness, and of course, we do have president now, so executive branch led by the president. No national court system has changed, and now we have a federal court and Supreme Court. Amendments required a unanimous vote. We have changed that to 2/3 Congress, 3/4 of state to get amendment put into the Constitution. And then lastly, states print their own currency. So now we do have a national currency that goes across the nation, so no more hardships when it comes to trading and traveling. And that will be it for today. Make sure that if you have any questions, you can reach out to me, shoot me an email, I'll get back to you pretty quickly. If you need to pause the video at any time, make sure you do that so you can get all the notes down. And we'll discuss this more next week.